I'm really delighted to introduce Stephen Brobst. Stephen is a double E graduate from Cal. He was the winner of the Bechdel Engineering Award, which is apparently a very prestigious award. Those of you who are in engineering know that more than I do. He got a PhD at MIT. He went on to do 4 startups before becoming the CTO at Teradata, and he has served on the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, otherwise known as PCAST. I'm going to turn it over to Stephen to talk about data science is the key to business success.
It's good to be back here on campus. I was reflecting when Ken was talking about going across the street and programming. I went to the basement of Evans to program, so it was very different back then. And so I was asked today to talk about the hard stuff in this whole data science thing, and that has nothing to do with technology. Right? As CTO, usually I end up talking about technology stuff. That's actually the easy stuff. And I think John sort of made that point earlier from Chip Mail. So if we look at an organization and you ask them this very simple question, how do you make decisions as an organization? You know, in this room, you're kind of preaching to the choir. Of course you make decisions with data. Well, you'd be pretty amazed that most organizations don't. And don't even know how, much less don't do it, right? And so most decisions end up getting made from the gut of the stomach or pulling out of their ear or some other orifice, and they're not getting good answers, right? And what I wanted to do is take you through 3 mini case studies, real case studies with the names removed, and sort of help you understand kind of what people are dealing with out there in these big, slow-moving companies that John was talking about. So this first one is an airline. And so many of you will know that, you know, if you're flying, for example, let's say you're flying from San Francisco and you're unlucky enough to get a connecting flight through Chicago O'Hare to go to New York City, you'll know that basically by definition your flight is late into Chicago O'Hare, by definition, right? Now the only question is, are you going to make your connection or not? Okay? And so many times you don't make the connection. There's a whole bunch of analytics and goes into who gets reaccommodated, but let's forget that for a second, right? Let's talk about the people who got stuck in Chicago against their will, right? What do you do with those people, right? So one philosophy is, well, people have short memories. Do nothing, hope they forget, hope they forgive, right? Remember, our objective here is to retain our most valuable customers, right? Maximize the lifetime value of those frequent flyers, right? And I'll tell you that do nothing is a bad idea, right? So if you did test and control groups of do nothing versus an apology letter, take responsibility, it costs you nothing, a stamp. And it doesn't take a very sophisticated data warehouse to have a list of the passengers that were on that flight that misconnected. Very easy thing to do. Send the apology letter. I guarantee you a better lifetime value on those customers. That's the easy part of the discussion, right? So let's get to a slightly harder one. What if we have an apology and we really mean it? We're going to give them a $200 voucher. We're sorry. We will do better, and we'll prove it by subsidizing your next flight. Right? Does providing the $200 voucher, along with the apology letter, give you a better lifetime value for those frequent flyers? How many people think gives a better value? $200. A few? Okay. And how many think doesn't? Okay. Okay, most people are voting. All of you people, you just made the decision out of your ear or out of your gut and so on. You had no data, right? You are bad decision makers. The reality is, the good consulting answer, classic, is it depends, right? So analytically, I can tell you for which customers I should give the $200 voucher and which ones I shouldn't. Some should only get an apology letter, and some should get the $200 voucher, right? And analytically, I can tell you which ones are which, okay? If I've done the appropriate things with the data in the past and so on, okay? So now there's another option. Instead of the $200 voucher, we give a 1-year membership in the VIP lounge for the airline. So it basically means you get to go drink their beer and eat their pretzels while you're waiting for their flight. Right? So is it better to give the $200 voucher or the membership in the VIP lounge? Right? Now I want to ask the question again, because now you know you shouldn't answer, because then you're one of those gut feeling ones, right? But I'll tell you that the airline was doing the wrong one of these things for many, many, many years. Why? Because that's the way they had always done it. Right? This is a very bad reason. A very bad reason. Okay? It's kind of the point that John made about, can you do business differently? You need to question doing business differently, but then you need to analyze, does doing business differently actually make a difference? Right? The fifth option, any frequent flyer knows frequent flyer points are worthless. Right? So your frequent flyer points, 25,000 miles for this airline is basically one round trip airfare. Right? You get one round trip for $25,000. The problem is you can never use frequent flyer miles to fly anywhere you want to go when you want to go there. You can fly to Dayton, Ohio in the middle of the winter. That's it. Right? So basically, this is not the right answer. This doesn't work with frequent flyers. Right? So it's one of these two. I'm not going to tell you the answer yet. I'm going to tell you later. Let you cogitate on it a little bit, and then I'll talk to you about how they came to that decision. Okay? Another one. So here we have a market research problem that we want to get people to participate in our study. Fill out a survey. Right? If you're like me, you probably get 50 survey requests a day. Right? So I just, I just flew in on a flight from Shanghai. I've already gotten the survey request from the airline and the survey request for Expedia to tell me how they like the airline. Right? And then there's a rental car request and all these things. You get so many. So you have to convince people to fill out the survey. Right? You don't want just anybody. They're targeting a certain level of management and so on. And so what is the best way to encourage participation in the market research survey? Right? So we want to, of course, minimize the spend, right, but maximize the participation, get the right kind of trade-off there. So one option is a $25 gift certificate from Amazon. Right? Option number 2, I'll put you in a lottery with a 5% chance of winning an iPhone, which has, let's say, a $500 value. Right? The mathematicians among you will understand that the expected value of those two is identical. Right? But the persons to whom the offer responds to are very different. People in sales always think they're going to win. People in sales, that's number 2 is like getting a $500 phone. They don't understand the concept of 95% they're not going to get it. Right? Whereas an actuary, give me the $25 certificate. Right? It's very, so they actually appeal, the different offers appeal to different people. Right? $25 donation to the participant's charity of choice. This works really well for females and people who work in healthcare. Males otherwise, nope, sorry, not going to fill out your survey. Right? So these all have the same expected value in some form, and yet appeal to very different demographics. Right? A software engineer will do anything for a free T-shirt. Right? So you have to understand your audience. Now, how do I know these things? Because they did tests on all these different kind of offers to get people to participate in the survey. Right? This last one's interesting. Choose any of the above. Rationally, this should be the best, right? Choose any of the above. It means I can take any one. It should be the best. It's actually the worst. There's a great book by a guy named Dan Ariely who wrote a book called Predictably Irrational. And he talks about the cost of decision making. There is a cost to making a decision. And if I don't care about the decision, in other words, I don't care about your survey, I'm not going to think very hard about which one of those 4 options that I want, and I'm just not going to make a decision. And we don't have enough time, but there's a whole bunch of insidious things that you can do with this. All right, read his book. It's a very good book. He's at Duke at the Fuqua School of Business. He wrote the book when he was at MIT, back when I was there. Last mini example, pricing example. So you've created this new product. You're a manufacturing company, a consumer packaged goods company. And this product that you've created is differentiated in some interesting way. You've innovated, right? How do you price the product? So you want to maximize your profits, and picking the price for your product is very, very important. How do you do it? So the rational engineer would say, well, we can calculate the cost, the all-in cost, the R&D cost, the manufacturing cost, marketing, distribution, all that stuff. And we know our shareholders expect a certain margin back, a certain return to the investors. So we take the cost and we add the target margin to that, and that's how we price. Right? It has nothing to do with maximizing profitability. It's very rational. It has nothing to do with maximizing profitability because it doesn't understand price and demand at all. There's nothing there. Right? So this is rational, but it's not the right answer. You can undercut the low-price competitor. Look at all the other competitors, because every product, even if it's different, has a competitor. Take the low-price competitor and undercut them. Well, basically, you just said, my innovation isn't worth anything. Right? So that's a bad strategy, right? It's basically saying I'm competing only on price. Competing only on price is the death spiral. Right? So we want to take value for the innovation that we created. So maybe we should price at a 10% premium above the closest substitute product. Why 10%? Right? It's one of those kind of numbers. A sophisticated customer, I'll use Procter & Gamble as an example of someone who's very good at this, they will actually deploy the product in different test markets with some level of equivalence at different price points and basically calculate the price elasticity curve using the data. Right? Now, it only works if you're going to sell a lot of the product, and small price differences make a difference in the bottom line, which for P&G it definitely does. Right? So using the data to do the pricing is a much better strategy. Now, there's an interesting example. I'm from Silicon Valley originally, grew up just south of here, on that other campus of that small junior college we won't mention. And more important than Silicon Valley, north of here is another valley, much more important, Napa Valley. I hope most of you know it, right? And in Napa Valley, there's a vineyard that did a very interesting experiment. You might have read the research paper if you're into this field. So the vineyard was interested in, a bottle of Cabernet. How should you price a bottle of Cabernet? It's kind of, because every vineyard is different in the wine that they produce. How do you price it? So, being good data scientists, we'll run an experiment. So we'll take consecutive weekends and we'll price the bottles of wine differently on weekends that have roughly the same traffic and so on. What we're trying to do is understand, what the price elasticity curve looks like. So we have a bottle of wine and we price it at $20. And we look to see how much volume do I get out of that $20 price. The following weekend, same traffic, summer month and so on, we price the bottle of wine, same wine, $40. So if I sell, half as many bottles of wine, even a little bit less, right, then I'm good, right? I've made a better price. So they ran the experiment. They sold many more bottles of wine. Right? This is called the Veblen effect. If you're familiar with economics, there are certain products that a higher price actually creates higher demand because there's a cachet effect. Right? It works very well in wine and fashion. Right? Doesn't work on products that are commodity. But if your product is differentiated in a significant way and you can't compare them easily, right, it works extremely well. Right? Of course, the way that most people do it is they pull it out of the air and the price is $10.99. Right? Bad way to do it. So what I'm going to argue is a better way, again, preaching to the choir, use the data. Use the data. The problem is the data is not always available. If the data is there, sure, go get the data, run your models and so on. The data is not already there. So actually designing experiments and collecting the data, that's actually the hard part of data science. Right? Getting the data and sort of crunching it through a mathematical model, okay, we probably most of the people in this room know how to do that. Right? Design the experiment, get the data. Now, the airline example that I used earlier, right? They got a new chief marketing officer into the role, and she asked the question, why? Why are we doing the voucher? Why aren't we doing these other things? And the answer was, as I told you already, because we always did it that way. Now think about it from an airline perspective. How long, if you do an A/B test, does it take you to understand the lifetime value impact of a different of a different treatment. In the airline industry, it'll take you a year to figure it out, right? It's not something you can go into the back data. Assuming you hadn't already run the experiments, you can't go into the back data. You're going to take a year to figure out whether the VIP lounge was better or the $200 voucher was better, right? She was confident in her employment prospects that she'd still be there in a year, and she ran the experiment, and it turned out the $200 voucher is the wrong answer, right? And after the fact, it's easy to say, well, of course the lounge was a better answer, because if we give the $200 certificate, you get people that cherry pick, just use the certificate, and then they don't come back, so you lose the money and so on. Whereas the lounge, you only get to use the lounge if you bought a ticket from us. And so you can always justify the decisions. And what I see a lot being called data science is actually using data to justify decisions that have already been made. That doesn't count as data science. You're not actually running an experiment. You're actually doing analysis on data to prove something that you believe already, to justify a decision. And that's really that's not analytic excellence, right? And the problem that we have culturally is that in our business environment, we expect, our boss to know the answer, right? So how are we going to price the product? Everybody looks around the room, right? And they look at the hippo. Have you heard this term, the hippo? Highest paid person's opinion, right? Hippo gets to make the decision. And the real problem with the hippos are usually consultants. They don't even have to live with the decision afterwards, right? So this is a very bad way to make decisions, right? So in mature competing on analytics organization, so I'm taking the title of Davenport's book here, which I think does a good qualitative job of describing why it is that it's important to use data science to drive decisions. If you want the quantitative basis, read Brynjolfsson paper. Eric Brynjolfsson. It's a much more, it's kind of got the Harvard thing and the MIT thing going on, right? So the qualitative and the quantitative. Read them together and you'll really get a very good picture. And the point here is organizations like to talk about how much data they have and how big their data warehouses are and how much technology they have, and none of that matters if you're not actually experimenting. Because a lot of times they use these data warehouses and they produce a lot of reports. And I would argue the value of reports in most cases is probably less than the cost of delivering them, right? Okay, except for the regulatory ones, you have to do those, give them piles of paper, keep them away from you. But other than that, you shouldn't be doing reports, right? You should be using the data to constantly reevaluate the way that you do business and drive experiments that create different kinds of actions and processes in the business. So this A/B testing is very important. It's not how big your data is, it's how you're using it, and particularly how you use it to drive experiments, right? This is why Capital One was probably the only bank in the US that made lots of money during the financial crisis, because they adjusted very quickly as the conditions change, and they're constantly doing test and control groups. Everything is a test and control group at Cap One. Or you look, down south at eBay, right? You think you're going to the eBay website. There's not one website, there's 200 websites, and everybody who goes to eBay is part of an experiment, whether you know it or not. Right? And it's very easy for the business to create different rules and different versions of the website and so on. There's champion challenger going on all the time. I'm going to echo a point that Ken made earlier, right? It's not just about the science, right? There's a real danger that we overanalyze with mathematics without understanding the art part, right? So in the beginning, I talked about this art versus science. It's not art versus science, it's art plus science. That's where you win, right? Because if you use only the mathematics, then you will get to a local maxima. The way that you are currently doing things, you will be the best at it in your industry, right? But the other hill over here is much higher. You just can't see it, because you're stuck in the mathematics. And you need the crazy thinker to come up with new ideas, the artist, free thinking, and so on. You need those people, right? I remember at one of the automotive insurance companies that I worked with, they had this crazy actuary, and he'd come to work with long hair and no shoes. In Silicon Valley, it's just normal, but in Connecticut, that's really bizarre for people to come to work with just flip-flops and so on. And he was the ideas guy, and he was constantly thinking new kinds of data they could put in their actuarial models and so on. And it was because of him that this particular insurance company was able to make significantly better profit than all of their other competitors for many years, because he found a piece of data the other ones hadn't thought of. Right? Then eventually someone left that company, went to the other company and broke their NDA and told it, and then it kind of got around. But they made, for many years, they made a lot more money because they had the crazy guy that thought of the new data that they were going to use. Right? So I would argue that the biggest challenge to competing on analytics have nothing to do with technology. It's really all about culture and skill sets. And the problem is that the senior management in most enterprises, they got there by making very good intuitive gut decisions. And so you got to change the culture in an organization. You got to ask the boss to support your data-driven decision making, and yet they're going to say, "Well, I got here without all that stuff. Why do you need it?" So there's a lot of sort of barrier breaking that you have to do in order to be successful. Right? These skill sets are in very short supply in the marketplace, and a good data scientist can use the data in a very different way than a business analyst. Now, the joke in the industry is, what is a data scientist? It's a business analyst who lives in Silicon Valley and makes $20,000 or more than everybody else, right? But in reality, I think there is a big difference. Right? The difference being that the business analysts are about getting the answer to a business question. Data scientist doesn't care about the answer to a business question. Data scientist wants to know what the question should be. It's very different. Once you know the question, getting the answer is the easy part. Data scientists, they're not using reporting tools and so on. They're looking for patterns and relationships in the data. It's a very, very different thing. Okay? And these data scientists, they're very important to your extreme data initiatives, big data, the big buzzword in the Valley right now. Right? These are very important people. Here's the aforementioned article from Harvard Business Review that John alluded to. My nephew is about to come here to university next year, and he's on the debating team in his high school and has won all these national competitions, and he thinks he wants to come here and be a lawyer. I think he's very confused. He's very confused. We need another lawyer like we need a hole in the head. We need more data scientists. I'm trying to convince him he needs to do math and science and all the other stuff that goes around with that, right? But it's not easy having all the skill sets for a data scientist, right? Because it's not just about the math and the science, right? There's this innate curiosity and intuition that you need. That's more than math and science, right? And I think that one of the mistakes that people make is they think data scientist equals computer scientist. That's a huge problem, right? Because computer scientists are about writing code, right? Data scientists are not about writing code. They'll hack it together like the Perl scripts John was talking about, but it's really they're about the data. How do I get the data and drive decisions from the data? How do I gather the data? Yes, I need to understand statistics. I'm amazed at the number of people out there that don't understand the difference between causality and correlation. It's scary, right? Our high school and university systems do a pretty good job of teaching mathematics. When was the last time any of you actually used a partial differential equation? And it doesn't count if you're teaching your kid their homework, right? So, statistics, something we use all the time, expected value theory and so on, and yet what we learn in school probably is not nearly as sophisticated as what we learn in mathematics, right? And then we need this communication skill. This is very hard, right? I want all those things, and I want somebody who can explain the business impact without mentioning R squared, right? Hard. So at Nationwide Insurance, we call these unicorns, right? These mythical beasts that exist out there and really hard to find, really hard to find. So when you do find them, how do you make them successful? There are two things that are most important to a data scientist. Okay? So the first thing is data scientists love the data more than anything else. Anybody between them and the data is the enemy. Right? We usually call them DBAs, right? Because we build these big data warehouses with all this data, and then the castle guards sit in front of the holy tower, and they get to choose who gets to come in and use the data, what questions they get. They are the enemy, right? Anybody between the data science and the data, that's the enemy, right? And the other enemy is the financial controller. What is the ROI on that? Well, I don't know. It's an experiment. We got to run this. No. What is the ROI before you start? Doesn't work. Doesn't work, right? So we'll talk about this. We need to think of data science. It's data R&D, right? And innovation requires failure. And the whole point is failure needs to be fast and cheap, so when you find the good stuff, the ROI of those 1 in 10 successes or 1 in 100 successes far outweigh the failures. And I don't want these reporting types of tools. I want tools that allow me to visualize the data so I can see patterns and relationships, because humans are very good at seeing patterns and relationships and visualizations and very bad at seeing them in tiny little cells on Excel spreadsheets, right? So the idea of a self-provisioning of the data is very, very important, right? Allow the data scientists to have control of the data. Allow the data science to visualize the data. This is from a local bank, actually, looking at what are the patterns of churn that lead to account closure across all the different channels, integrating the data and so on. Trying to do this in a report of Excel would be very hard. And even this is probably confusing to most of you, because I'm only giving you 2 seconds to look at it. I can refine it further and align it to the most popular patterns and so on, using this sort of combination of SQL and MapReduce and all this techie stuff we're not going to go into. All right? But the point is, reports don't work. Visualizations generally do work. Right. So the one and only technology slide, and I'll end here. In order to make this work, we need to differentiate between data R&D and data manufacturing. So the data scientists live in data R&D. And they're going to come here to what we refer in the industry as the data lake, all the data forever, in a raw form. And I'm going to bring it into my R&D lab, and I'm going to play with the data and look for the patterns and so on. And a lot of times I'm going to fail, but it's OK as long as it's cheap. And I'm going to use the no ETL strategy here. I'm going to be pretty raw, like we do in laboratory environments. And the whole concept of late binding and so on comes into play here. And then, once I found the really good stuff, then I'm going to do the proper cleansing and transformation and productize it so I can manufacture it at scale for the organization, so I can drive all those decisions that the business analysts want to make from that data. So I think it's important from a process point of view to differentiate between data R&D and data manufacturing. With that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.